Hi, and welcome to Axelbank Reports History and Today, conversations with America's top nonfiction authors and why their books matter right now. I'm Evan Axelbank, and today we're going to speak with Alex Prud'homme, the author of Dinner with the President, Food, Politics, and a History of Breaking Bread at the White House. He's written several books and is a freelance writer whose work has appeared in numerous national publications. Thanks so much for being here, Alex.
Thanks, Evan. Glad to be here.
Before we start our interview, I want to invite listeners to our Patreon page to ask for your support in keeping the show going. Go to patreon.com/AxelbankHistory. We will donate part of your contributions to a charity that promotes children's literacy. There is a special feeling when someone says, "Hey, we should get dinner sometime." Even if it's not a date, even if it's not going to be fancy, and even if the person who invites you isn't the president. So getting invited to the White House, where the food is carefully prepared, where you'll be surrounded by history, and where you'll be hosted by the leader of the free world, is the biggest dinner invite there is. It's so big that even the vice president sometimes has to beg for a weekly lunch. But I want to start at my original point. When there is an invite to dinner, forgetting presidents, just from civilian to civilian, Evan to Alex, let's say, what are we actually doing as a species? What does it mean to have dinner together?
Well, that's a great question because it goes back to our prehistory when we first began to gather and break bread together, as the old biblical saying goes. And it turns out, when I spoke to authorities on this, that it is a very meaningful thing for humans to gather and eat together. It's something that we kind of take for granted, but it was a real breakthrough for humankind to learn how to do that and not fight over food, to share resources and to eat communally. And it turns out that in this process, we release endorphins, which are the naturally occurring opioids in our bodies that make us feel good. And they say it's akin to primates grooming each other, except it's actually even more effective to eat together because you can get many more people eating together than you can grooming each other.
And
That's for
sure.
You know, the old phrase breaking bread really refers to a moment kind of out of time when we put our weapons aside, we have frank conversations, we broker business deals, political arrangements, marriages. It's a way of communicating outside of the normal context. And it's been very effectively used as a political and diplomatic tool for as long as humans have been negotiating with each other. What I found interesting is the way that some presidents and first families understood this intuitively, while others were completely clueless. And it was just sort of fascinating to me to see. And my pet theory is that the presidents who understand the political and diplomatic value of food are ultimately better presidents.
Well, we're going to get to some of that. But one of the opening quotes in your book is from Anthony Bourdain, and it says, "Nothing is more political than food. Nothing." How is broccoli political?
Yeah, George H.W. Bush famously said that, I'm president and my mother used to make me eat broccoli and I never liked broccoli and I'm not going to eat it anymore.
Yeah, she probably still made him, by the way. Yeah.
Huh?
She probably still made him eat broccoli.
Yeah,
right?
for sure. It was kind of a throwaway line, but it had huge political repercussions. The broccoli farmers, it turns out, are pretty powerful, and they were outraged by this because they were afraid it was going to impact their sales. So they brought 10 tons of broccoli to the White House in protest.
That's a
At which
very good
point,
political move too.
yeah. At which point,
How was food political? How is nothing more political than food?
well, food is the food, capital F. It's the largest sector in our economy, and it affects everything from, water, land, air, climate change, the chemical industry, nutrition, national health, personal health. It's this enormous subject. So, as we discovered in COVID, when a part of the supply chain breaks down, it causes chaos. And our system is not very resilient because it hasn't been challenged recently until COVID. And so we need to pay attention to it. And one of the lessons of COVID was that the conglomerization of food companies led to a huge problem because we just couldn't bounce back. And we're still kind of dealing with that. It's still working its way through the system. And so, when Bourdain is saying that every time you approach a meal, there are more than one message, especially if you're the president, that it is at the White House, a meal is never simply a meal. It is a series of signals and signs to various different constituencies about priorities, likes and dislikes, personal and political.
You say the table is a neutral place. The dinner table is a neutral place. But when the president is sitting on the other end of it, the seesaw kind of starts to tilt towards the seat the
Correct.
president is sitting in. How have presidents understood that over time?
Well, if you're someone like Thomas Jefferson, who was not only an epicure, but a master politician, invites you to dinner, what he serves, the way he serves it, who's cooking it, who's sitting where and how, all of these things matter. So he was an early proponent of what we call gastro diplomacy. So he would invite rival factions over for dinner. And I open the book with a scene where he invites Alexander Hamilton and James Madison to dinner because they're fighting so much that he's afraid that the young republic is going to be ripped apart. And he has this wonderful dinner cooked by his slave chef, James Hemings, at his house here in New York City, which was the temporary capital. And these two guys can't speak to each other. They hate each other so much. But behind closed doors at this secret dinner, this wonderful food and wine works its magic and calms them down. And by the end of the dinner, they're actually talking and they reach a political compromise by which they figure out how to essentially create the modern financial system that kept America afloat and where to site the federal capital of Washington, D.C. And these seems like kind of obscure issues now, but at the time they were extremely important. And this secret dinner became known as the dinner table bargain, and it arguably saved the nation. And it's been memorialized in the musical Hamilton recently by Lin-Manuel Miranda in the song "The Room Where It Happens," which is all about how the sausage gets made in these backroom deals. And interestingly, it's rapped by Aaron Burr, who was not invited and was incredibly jealous. So these dinners can have outsized importance.
Your story for how you came up with this book is connected to your family member. And I know you're probably sick of hearing, but everyone is probably amazed when they hear you're related to Julia Child. How did that happen? The story of your White House tour turning into this book is really fascinating and just awesome, I have to say.
Oh, great. Well, to begin with, my whole family loves food and a lot of good cooks, but we also like to sit around the table and argue about politics and history. So that's the background. Yes, Julia Child was my great aunt. Her husband, Paul, was the twin brother of my grandfather, Charlie Child. And Paul and Julia never had kids, but they treated all of us as surrogate grandchildren. And so we spent a lot of time with them. And I helped her write her memoir, My Life in France, which led to half of Julie and Julia, the movie. And one of the things I discovered in my research is that she had spent quite a bit of time at the White House, which she didn't really talk about that much. Most notably in 1967, when she was the first person to bring TV cameras into the White House kitchen and show a behind-the-scenes look at what it takes to put on a state dinner. And she and Paul had been diplomats before getting on television, and they understood the diplomatic and culinary aspects of a state dinner. And they wanted to show the people a side of the people's house that they'd never seen before. And this was LBJ hosting the Prime Minister of Japan, and Tony Bennett performed, and it was a huge hit, this TV show. And you can see it online. It's called White House Red Carpet, and I highly recommend it. It's shot in black and white film, and Julia's wearing this mod coat and looking very groovy, 67. And then 9 years later, she did it again at the 76th bicentennial when Gerald Ford hosted Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. That was a less successful dinner because they had meticulously planned this event in a white tent over the Rose Garden. It was the Queen. It was a big deal. And right before the celebration, a rainstorm came in off the Potomac River and just soaked everything, knocked down the TV cameras, got Julia wet. They had to regroup, and Bob Hope's jokes were kind of lame. And when the Queen was dancing with Gerald Ford, the military band struck up "The Lady Is a Tramp" by mistake. And then the Captain and Tennille were warbling about muskrat love as the entertainment, and Julia deemed that rather unqueenly. But at the end of the day, she loved being at the White House with the Queen, and these kinds of stories kind of just piqued my interest. I just started studying state dinners. It's a phenomenon that I had heard of, but I wasn't really that familiar with. So I started researching that. And then in 2016, I had a book out about fresh water called The Ripple Effect. And I was invited to give a short talk to some mid-level staff in the Obama administration. And I had a friend in the administration, and he said, well, you're coming to the White House. Why don't we have lunch at the Navy Mess, which is probably the world's most unusual cafeteria. It's on the ground floor of the White House next to the Situation Room. And after lunch, we took a quick tour of the White House, and I saw the Oval Office and the State Dining Room and the Executive Kitchen. And walking through those halls, seeing the busts and the portraits of the presidents and the first ladies, and just looking around at this place that I'd seen photographs of for so long, really impacted me in an emotional way that I was not expecting. And it brought history alive. And suddenly these people who seemed kind of godlike appeared more like three-dimensional, quirky human beings. And I thought that was really exciting. And so without realizing it, at that moment, the seed for this book was planted. And it took me a couple of years to get to writing it because I was doing other things. But I started work on this book in 2018 and dove in, and I quickly discovered that every president has an interesting food story. So the really hard thing was to decide what not to use.
Yeah.
I ended up focusing on 26 presidents and, in various lengths, and I tried to show different aspects of the presidency and looking at the White House and the American history through a culinary lens.
I mean, I've probably read maybe 2 or 3 dozen compilation treatments of the presidency itself where they go president by president. And this really is one of the best. I love this approach of looking at the presidency through food. It was so interesting and so fresh and new. I'm curious. I love asking about sources. What were your sources for this? I guess when you go to the John Adams Museum or you go to the Clinton Library, they probably don't have sections of papers devoted to just the food. So do you have to comb through each president's papers and pull out the food anecdotes, or were you looking through books that had already been written to see about their treatments of food?
Baking from our childhoods just sticks in the memory, doesn't it? We never set off on holiday without piles of Tupperware. And there'd always be Bakewell slice, flapjacks, and tray baked scones in the boot.
Do you not do that, Lisa?
Yeah, no. Sadly, I do not stack the Tupperware in the back of the car when we go off on holiday.
Oh.
Welcome to Small Ways to Live Well, a new podcast from the Simple Things magazine. Season 2 is a pick-me-up tonic that helps us make the shift from winter to spring. A 6-week suggestion box full of things to note, notice and enjoy about the season. Search for Small Ways to Live Well on your podcast app.
Really all of the above. I came at it, there are quite a few cookbooks by former White House chefs. And there are a few sort of pop cultural histories that include food, but no one's done this book really, which is really essentially about the politics of food and the food of politics. So I did a fair amount of primary research. As I said, I began in the fall of 2018, and I was hoping to get the book done in 2 to 2.5 years, and I was well on my way when suddenly COVID hit and just put the brakes on everything because all of the museums and resources shut down. But at that point, I had visited, I don't know, 6 or 7 presidential homes and sites. I had developed relationships with the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian, which have vast resources. And so when COVID hit, I was able to draw on those people who would send me things electronically or sometimes physically through the mail. And that was a great help. But it was frustrating because, like you, I'm a reporter. I like to get out into the world and actually see things because like I said about the White House, it really brings history alive in a way that looking at a picture or reading about it doesn't. And it allowed me to make my own conclusions about these guys as human beings and as leaders. And so it was a little frustrating, and it delayed the book by a year or more. We faced supply chain issues and just getting the book printed and published. But it was a really fun book to work on, and it's been fun to get out and talk about.
Yeah, you chose 26 presidents out of the 46 presidents to highlight. I am not going to be able to get through all 26 of yours, so I want to start and run through a couple of them, beginning at Teddy Roosevelt and his very consequential dinner with Booker T. Washington.
That's a fabulous story, and the subject is kind of my subject about presidential food. It's an umbrella under which you can put so many things. One of the themes of the book is race. The early presidents' cooks were slaves. But by the time Teddy Roosevelt became president at 26, he was the youngest president. He became president when McKinley was shot. And so there's a period of a month or 6 weeks after the mourning period when the president's not really supposed to do any entertaining at the White House. But here's this young, dynamic guy who has enough energy for 3 presidents, and he's just chomping at the bit to get going. So at the very end of the mourning period for McKinley, he invites Booker T. Washington to the White House for dinner. Now, Booker T. Washington was born a slave, but he was an intellectual. He was a writer. He was the first leader of the Tuskegee Institute. And Roosevelt had consulted him in the past and really respected him and thought it was appropriate to invite him for dinner to pick his brains about some upcoming legislation. And so he did. And it was, as far as he was concerned, it was no big deal. It was normal business. And they had a quiet dinner at the White House with a Colorado businessman, just the 3 of them. And as usual, the names of the people dining at the White House were simply listed in the newspaper the next day. And this caused this enormous vitriolic response, particularly in the South, but also in the North, from racists saying, "Oh, how could you possibly do this? A Black man has never been considered an equal at the dining table at the White House. We're going to have to start killing Black people because of this." And some people even twisted it to say that by inviting Booker T. Washington to dinner, Roosevelt was essentially offering his daughter to Washington. It was just a very strange, awful response. And Roosevelt was taken aback by this, and his advisors said quietly that this may have been a political error. And he had no regrets. He said, "I respect Booker T. Washington. I value his advice, and yet he never did it again." And so there's a political third rail, if you will, around race.
The president after him is, of course, Taft, both in your book and in reality. I wanted to, it was just I don't want to say it was cringeworthy because, he had his own psychological demons and what have you, but he ate so much meat. And I was just aghast at the size of the meals that he was able to put down. It was maybe aghast isn't the right word. I was just amazed at it. Uh, how did the politics, how have the politics of the president's physical shape evolved before and including and then after Taft?
Great question. So at 350 pounds, he was our heaviest president, and he was one of the first presidents to not only, well, first of all, to address your meat question, he ate steak sometimes 3 times a day. And when he wasn't eating steak, he would eat things like roasted possum, which was one of his favorites. And that was considered, the height of sophistication back then. And this is one of the interesting aspects of the book, is talking about the evolution of the American diet through the lens of the presidency. So he was also one of the first presidents to openly talk about going on a diet. He had an English doctor who advised him on what he should be eating. And he would give these rosy reports about his dieting while secretly cheating. So he didn't lose too much weight. And ultimately it caught up with him. He was a very bright guy. He became a Supreme Court Chief Justice after his presidency, the only man to have both offices. And his shape it's really interesting. I mean, the people made fun of him and he made fun of himself. He took up golf because he wanted some exercise, but he didn't want to move around too much, and became a kind of a proselytizer for golf. And it actually caused a rift between him and Roosevelt. And Roosevelt said, "Oh, you should never talk about your personal things. That will mark you as an elitist." But actually, he helped to kind of democratize golf as a game. He was the precursor to other presidents who've struggled with their weight. I mean, or with their diet. I mean, Bill Clinton famously ate a lot of junk food growing up and had a weak heart. And when they moved to the White House, Hillary Clinton hired a new chef who specialized in a lighter, more fusion cuisine.
And it was hard for them to find her, the chef, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah. The search for a White House chef is a really big deal. And they brought this guy, Walter Scheib, on board, who dramatically changed Clinton's diet, made it much more vegetable forward. Ultimately, Clinton became a vegetarian. And then after he left the White House, he became a vegan for a while. And I think he's slipped back to eating chicken and fish now. But you can see in the photographs, he's really lost a lot of weight. And the fact that he's still alive is kind of remarkable. I mean, more recently, Donald Trump had a kind of Taftian diet. He ate a lot of red meat. The only vegetable that I could find that he ate was iceberg lettuce on his taco bowls or his burgers. But he was, sort of non-apologetic about that. And you contrast that to his predecessor, Barack Obama, who is more like Thomas Jefferson, kind of a vegetable forward eating guy, famous for his love of kale and arugula and a snack of only 7 almonds. And, the Taft's day is interesting because it was the beginning of an image consciousness that we now embrace wholeheartedly, where a large president, even though his mind was intact, if his body wasn't physically fit, we imputed something to that. Harry S. Truman was very proud of the fact that he worked out every day, get up early, he'd swim, he'd go to the gym, then he'd have a little shot of whiskey to keep himself going. He was, Nixon was also proud that he could fit into the suit that he was married in. So the physical appearance was exacerbated by the arrival of television, where one's appearance is magnified, as you know, as a TV journalist, that it's the camera that focuses on things like your body, and we are now so body conscious that it's a big deal.
It's not just that TV adds 10 pounds. I don't know that I agree with the 10 pounds, but I do think that it magnifies everything about somebody, like maybe tenfold. And so the way you look definitely comes into play if you are on television and suddenly you go, whoa, I really look like that? That's weird. I have that feeling every day.
It's a little shocking.
Every day I look, boy, I really look like.
Yeah.
I want to ask you how JFK revolutionized the social aspect of the White House function. And maybe the question is more so about Jackie. How did she revolutionize not just the White House kitchen, but the whole social scene?
Yeah, great question because, as you say, it was really a team, the two of them. They were this glamorous, almost regal Hollywood celebrity type couple, young, beautiful, wealthy, whip smart. And it was really Jackie who drove this. She intentionally modeled her White House entertaining on King Louis XIV, the Sun King of France, who famously used gastro diplomacy to keep his friends close and his enemies closer. And so she did this, and she, with the backing of her wealthy father-in-law, Joe Kennedy, was able to not only redecorate the White House in high style, but created the office of White House curator and also created the role of executive chef. And for that job, she hired a guy named René Verdon, who was a French chef, very accomplished cook, and used his food and essentially the stage set of the White House to make 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue the place to be, with a series of remarkable dinner parties. One of my favorites was called the Brains Dinner, not because they were eating brains, but because they had invited the Nobel Prize laureates for dinner, and this had never been done before. And it was just an amazing meal. Another time she had André Malraux, who was the French cultural minister, for dinner. And at that dinner, they quietly brokered an arrangement where France allowed the Mona Lisa to leave Paris for the first time ever, come to the United States, and was put on display at the National Gallery. And this set off something called Mona Mania, where over 1 million people came to see the painting. And all of this stuff redounded very favorably to the Kennedys. It enhanced their profiles and enhanced the Kennedy administration's agenda. And then she would do things like at a state dinner for Pakistan. She held the first ever state dinner outside of the White House at Mount Vernon, George Washington's plantation, just south of Washington. And this was for President Ayub Khan of Pakistan. And there's always a political or economic story behind these meals. And in this case, Khan was furious with Kennedy because he had given $1 billion in aid to India, Pakistan's arch rival. And so he had cut off the use of secret air bases in Pakistan being used by the CIA. So at this dinner, this beautiful evening where Jackie had set up a big tent on the lawn at Mount Vernon, the guests arrived by flotilla, including a PT boat like the one JFK piloted in the war. They go up the bluff and they're sitting, and the candlelight is glittering on the women's earrings, and the fireflies come out, and Henry Holler, the chef, René Verdon, the chef, creates this beautiful meal. And then right before dinner, Kennedy takes Khan on a walk through the garden, and just the two of them. And I would love to have been a fly on the wall because whatever he said worked like a charm. And lo and behold, between Jackie's beautiful mise en scène and Verdon's dinner and JFK's promises to Pakistan, Khan turned around and allowed the CIA to once again start flying spy planes out of Pakistan over China to observe their nuclear program, and also to drop insurgents into Tibet. And this was a really big deal during the Cold War. And it came in handy, this relationship that they developed over that meal. A year later, China invaded India. And, this is something that most Americans are not aware of, but we were embroiled in the Cuban Missile Crisis at the time. but this could have set off another world war or something. And luckily, we were able to, the two presidents had developed this relationship at that dinner, and were able to share intel, and it proved to be very fruitful. So, this is, again, a meal is never just a meal when it comes to the White House. There's always something else going on there.
And then there's Gerald Ford, who who made. I thought this story was awesome. He made his first presidential meal on his own, in his own kitchen, in his own house. How did that happen?
Well, Nixon, his predecessor, was dispatched very quickly, and Ford wasn't quite ready to become president yet. And so he hadn't moved into the White House. He was still living at his place in Virginia. And he's a guy who liked to make his own breakfast. And so the day he became president, he, as usual, he came out to his porch in his pajamas, picked up his newspaper, and suddenly heard all this clicking. It was all the cameras pointing at him.
Yeah.
And he rather sheepishly waved at the journalists and went back inside and cooked up a quick breakfast and had his orange juice and realized that the world had changed overnight for him. And, Fords were generous, lovely people from the Midwest, but he called himself the instant president, and he liked instant food and instant coffee. He thought that sleeping and eating were kind of a waste of time. So he was not a gourmet president at all. He was he made what he called Michigan gourmet, which was, meat and potatoes, basically.
All right, so I have two more presidents I want to ask you about, and then I have a quick little rapid fire round for you. Hit Reagan's jelly beans real quick. It's not necessarily
jelly beans,
a meal.
Cute candy that allowed Reagan to reach out to his voters, sort of saying, I like this food, you like this food, therefore vote for me. But sometimes it could backfire. It talked about him weaning himself from tobacco. It talked about the power of the sugar lobby. But when he was promoting jelly beans and defunding school lunches to the tune of $1.5 billion while calling ketchup a vegetable, he faced a huge backlash. And it happened that Nancy Reagan had, Nancy Reagan had just ordered a huge new set of White House china. And so this became this big bombshell that blew up in his face, and he kind of had to backtrack on all that.
All right, so George W. Bush and I have something in common, and I have arguments with my wife over this all the time. Well, not all the time, but whenever hot dogs come up. George W. Bush and I both believe in the ballpark steamed hot dog, not the grilled hot dog. Tell the story of when the White House chef and I guess meal team brought out the grilled hot dogs to the T-ball game. And right. George W. Bush said, no way, we need ballpark dogs here.
Exactly.
And how revealing of George W. Bush, right?
Well, he was part of the Texas Rangers, so he was a big baseball guy. He would have Yogi Berra and Sandy Koufax over for lunch, and he would have these T-ball games on the lawn, which was really great. And he insists on everybody having burgers and hot dogs. So the first time they did this, Walter Scheib, the chef, and the army guys who were helping him out set up these grills on the lawn, and they grilled dogs. And afterwards, Bush said, "Hey, this was a great event, so much fun, but never again on the grilled hot dogs. That's a real ballpark dog is steamed, not grilled."
That's it right there. I agree with that. I love it. I guess because that's where I grew up in New York in an apartment where we didn't have grills, right? And I also love baseball games. All right. So one cool thing about this book, and there are lots of them, but a lot of people don't know this, but you were president for an evening. And I think it is just so cool what you did. You created and built your own presidential meal from scratch. How did you do that? And how did that feel to have all these amazing chefs around you? Explain how you got this idea and what you did.
Sure. It was awesome. Well, I bet
it was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to emulate what my great aunt Julia had done, which is to show a state dinner from behind the scenes. Unfortunately, the Trump administration was not interested, so I could not get myself into a state dinner, which is hard in the best of times. And so I decided, well, what's the next best thing? I guess I'll hold my own state dinner. So through by hook and by crook, I was able to hire a former White House chef named John Mueller, who helped me create a meal of 4 dishes.
And who did he work for? Just real quick, who did he work for?
Oh, he worked for George W. And Clinton,
Okay.
and
So
was briefly the executive chef. Yeah, he's a really accomplished guy.
yeah. So
And
anyway, sorry. So
he did these 4 dishes, each of which had a historical story, each of which had actually been served at the White House. So we started off with a wild mushroom soup, which was a reference to George Washington starving at Valley Forge in 1777 and foraging for mushrooms. Then we had a beautiful piece of Scottish salmon with a horseradish crust, which he had served at several state dinners. That's a reference to the presidential salmon that was given every year from Maine to the president. Then we had a salad with a beautiful vinaigrette and a wedge of Amish cheese, which was a reference to Thomas Jefferson's famous salads and some of the giant cheeses that used to be given to the White House. And we finished with a chocolate bomb dessert, which was just fabulous. And who doesn't like chocolate? But chocolate was also originally part of the slave trade. So each of these things had a story. I had 10 guests, all of whom had either worked at the White House or covered it for the Washington Post or were food historians. And we sat around talking about state dinners, and it was just fascinating what they had to say and made me want to go all the more. And they were talking about the serious nature of these things, that state dinners are the culmination of diplomatic negotiations, but they're kind of a release. It's a party, and hopefully it's a good party. And so it's the best of American food, usually with a hint or a nod to the guest country in, a flavor or a type of wine or whatever. And then there's lots of shenanigans that go on because people get overwhelmed when they go into the White House, and they just get ridiculous, and they drink too much, and they won't let go of the president's hand, or they start to steal the silverware, or they refuse to leave at the end of the night. And so the social secretaries have developed these strategies to take care of the unruly guests. And so it was really fun to learn all about the inside workings of these things. And by the way, I'm still trying to get invited to a state dinner.
Well, I can't help you there. If I could help you, I'd be the one going. So,
yeah.
All right. A couple of rapid fire here. Best specific presidential meal. What would be your favorite meal as tied to a specific president?
Well, you'd have to go by era. And if I had to just pick one, I might go back to that dinner table bargain that Jefferson had for Hamilton and Madison, because it was such an extraordinary moment in history. The meal was fabulous, cooked by a slave, James Hemings, and the setting was Jefferson's private house, and it just would have been so cool to be there to see the nation being saved over dinner.
Least appetizing presidential meal? I have one, but by the way, my specific presidential meal that I would love to be at would be George W. Bush and steamed hot dogs.
There you go. I love it. The other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, exactly. Other end of the spectrum, right? The T-ball game. Least appetizing presidential meal for you?
I think maybe Woodrow Wilson's breakfast of 2 raw eggs in grape juice.
That's bad.
That's pretty gross.
That's pretty. Mine would be. Mine is Richard Nixon's cottage cheese lunch. No way.
Every day, cottage cheese. Yeah, with a glass of
milk. Most boring presidential eater.
Probably Wilson. He had a nervous stomach, and every time something went wrong during World War I, he'd get terrible indigestion and have to leave the peace conferences. And so he ate very bland food and sort of powdered things to try to make him give him some energy. And he was really not a foodie at all.
Most adventurous presidential eater.
Probably a tie between Barack Obama, who not only grew up in Hawaii, but also in Jakarta, Indonesia, and had a very global palate. And there's several, but, Teddy Roosevelt liked to eat elephant heart. His cousin Franklin liked all sorts of strange things like elk tongue and bison steaks. So between the Roosevelts and Obama, I think you'd get your adventurous eaters.
uh, uh, how would it change a president's perspective if they agreed to host, let's say, 4 or 5 random Americans for dinner once a year?
Oh, I think it's a great idea. They ought to do that. And in fact, Dwight Eisenhower would do a similar thing to that. He held what he called stag dinners, and he would invite people, some of them well known, but more often not, from around the country to come to the White House dinner. And it was all off the record, no journalists like us allowed there to spill the beans. And he would have these frank conversations around a meal where he was basically taking the pulse of the American public and finding out what was really going on in the country, what people's concerns were. And it was very effective. It was really smart of him. And just an aside, he was the best presidential cook yet. He was a fascinating guy. He's one of those guys who I thought was kind of boring. And then when I started to research him, he became this kind of fantastic Technicolor guy who had all these quirks and became he was a 5-star general, and he became a kind of a pacifist and just a really interesting, nuanced person.
What's your ideal number of people around the dinner table?
Well, Julia Child and I used to talk about this. 6 to 8 is kind of ideal. I mean, I like a big party, and I was just at one this past weekend. It reminded me how much fun it is and how much I missed this during COVID. But, if you want to have a real conversation, I would say, personally, around 10 to 12, because then you get more diversity of opinions, but it's not too big where nobody gets a chance to speak.
Interesting. I might go smaller, maybe 3 or 4. One inspired your love of food. The other inspired your love of history. Who are Erica Prud'homme and Hector Prud'homme?
Yeah.
Who are Erica and Hector Prud'homme?
They're my parents. My dad was a banker and a history buff who studied history at Yale. And we used to talk politics, and he was a voracious reader and really inspired that in me. And I became a history major at Middlebury College. And my mother was a wonderful cook, still is, and an artist, and really inspired my love of food and helped to develop my palate. And that's very important for kids to eat well, because then from an early age, food is not intimidating and you have a sense of adventure.
What's next for you? Dare I ask, is it going to be dessert with the president?
Could be. I've got a couple of ideas I'm noodling, but I've been so busy with dinner with the president that I haven't had a chance to do much research yet. And I'll let you know. So stay tuned.
Yeah, there you go. Well, it's just been a pleasure. Alex Prud'homme, the author of Dinner with the President, Food, Politics, and a History of Breaking Bread at the White House. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Evan. This has been great. Really enjoyed it. And as Julia would say, bon appetit.
There you go. Check out the book. Check out his website, alexprudhomme.com. He's on Twitter at @APrudhommeWords. I want to invite listeners to our Patreon page to ask for your support in keeping the show going. Go to patreon.com/AxelBankHistory. We will donate part of your contributions to a charity for children's literacy. And thanks so much for listening to Axel Bank Reports, History and Today. Conversations with America's top nonfiction authors and why their books matter right now. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Axel Bank History. We update those with clips from the show, guest announcements, and book recommendations. See you next time. Thanks.